Welcome back to the Impact Driven Leader podcast. This is your host, Tyler Dickerhoof. So glad you're listening in, or if you're watching on YouTube, glad you're here. Always grateful for all the comments that I get. I was at an event here locally, I think a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and a gentleman walked up, said hi to me, and he said, I love your show, get so much value. So Enoch, thank you for sharing that. Appreciate letting me know that you listen in and get value. Today, I'm excited to chat with a friend of mine. Jake Thompson is the author of Compete Every Day. He has Compete Everyday clothing. They have an entire suite of a lot of motivational material, right? He's also a speaker, does a lot of keynote speaking. Jake and I got to know each other a few years ago. I don't know how, randomly, came cross paths, whatever. I joined actually one of his book clubs. I mentioned that in this podcast, and I got to read so many great books that he, shared with me, exposed me to. Also similar books that I already read that I got to reread again. And it is from this idea that Jake shared this, how do we get better every day? That's really why I have launched this podcast, launched the book club that I have. And I'm excited for you to have listen to this conversation with Jake. I hope you get tremendous value out of it. The value of competing, what competing really means. Is competition bad? What does that look like? So get ready to take a few notes. Enjoy this conversation with Jake and I. All right, Jake, great to be here with you. Good to see you. Good to have a chance to record a podcast. It was just 2-3 months ago. We both were in Vegas, weren't able to meet up then, passing each other. I was there for a soccer tournament. You were there doing your stuff. So I'm excited to have you as a guest to talk about you, your brand, Compete Every Day, how that got started, but also really, again, as I mentioned earlier, tie that into leadership. Tie that into, how leaders can be the best version of themselves. So excited to chat with you, man.
Dude, let's do it. Oh, always a pleasure to hang out with you and get to talk shop. So today should be fun.
Yeah, it's what's funny over especially the last few months, obviously engaged with each other on social media and, the number of mutual friends that we have in this sim space, a lot of, my previous podcast guests. But then I stop and think, and it's like, man, how did we get connected? And I remember, of course, Compete Every Day. You launched a book club. I was a part of that book club. I read some of the best books. One book that you featured in that book club was Pound the Stone, which then I led my sons to both read. They loved it from that. My son's soccer club has read it. The technical director from the soccer club then took it to his college team that he trained. So that's what came out of the book club. And that's kind of why I also started a little bit of book club here with the Impact Driven Leader stuff. So thanks for that, man.
Dude, you bet. Yeah. If you find good work, good content, share it forward. I mean, as an author, that's the best thing you can ever have, is somebody refer it that you have no idea who they are. And so, might as well get that message in more kids' hands, especially of get your eyes off the outcome, just work the process. Yeah.
So let's kind of start here for everyone in the audience that's listening that maybe hasn't seen a lot of your Compete Everyday stuff. Would love for you to just kind of share, how did that get started? And, what really helped you grab a hold of that mantra and really as a business that's come of it and supporting people and speaking to organizations and doing a lot of keynote speaking. Would love to just kind of start through that process.
Yeah, so this little roller coaster, I'll say, started back in 2008. I had wanted to be the next Jerry Maguire growing up. I thought I was going to be a sports agent. And after a couple of years in that industry, I was finishing grad school. I realized this is not what I wanted the rest of my life. We had a recession. I have non-traditional work experience. I have an MBA. And so I couldn't honestly get a job. Everywhere I applied, couldn't even get a look. I laughed that Best Buy wouldn't even hire me for the holiday hours. And so I was like, what am I going to do? Fortunately, I had taught myself basic graphic design, basic web, and social media was super new. And so companies had no idea what they were doing other than treating it like every other advertising platform. And so I built a small consulting practice out of just teaching people to say, hey, create content that customers want to read and engage with to build your brand instead of thinking it has to be a direct sales channel. Built a good consulting practice for a few years. I'm in my mid-20s. I'm single, living in Dallas, making great money, but I was incredibly unfulfilled. And I looked at what I was doing as the equivalent of building this epic sandcastle on the beach that you want everybody to see. You think it's awesome. You're pointing at it. Everybody pay attention. And then the tide comes and it washes it away. And it's like it's never been there. And I felt like that was my career in life to that point. And really the book by Donald Miller, A Million Miles in 1,000 Years, really started challenging me on what story I was writing and how it wasn't a very good one. And so I started reframing how I was living life and saying, what kind of story do I want to write? How do I want to impact people? And I always went back to, and it's funny because I haven't talked about this publicly until the last year or so, but I always went back to college. I went to college to play football. I got hurt the summer before I got there, tore my shoulder up, set out the fall season, was just a student, had a chance to go spring semester. And I was a little scared of my shoulder. But I was like, I'm going to do it. And I spent like a week because I was athletic academic walk-on. I was late. I had to work out by myself. Didn't have any upperclassmen to kind of show me the ropes. Didn't have anybody to throw with. I'm an undersized guy. So I'm like, if I can't study, like I'm not going to have any advantage physically. And I remember doing that a week, and it was the most lonely and scared I've ever been in my life, because I was truly the freshman in the varsity locker room and nobody could show me the way. I was worried about my shoulder. And then I was going through the whole thing that we all go through as athletes, like the identity. What if I fail at the one thing I think I'm good at? And what if I'm not good enough? And I remember on a Friday afternoon finishing a weight room session and leaving and just being like, I'm done. I hate this. Like, listen to your gut feeling. My gut was in a knot, not because it was the wrong thing. It's because I've never done this before and I'm terrified. But I didn't know that. And so I spent a few years just emotionally in a roller coaster and pit of grieving loss, not realizing I was grieving loss, identity, all of that. And so here I am, flash forward, it's 2010, 11 at this point. I've been out of school 5-ish years. And I'm seeing the dots of like, I settled because I was scared. And then I looked around at friends and saw friends that were settling for crappy relationships with toxic people, jobs they hated, things that life just kind of handed them, and believing like that's my fate. And it broke my heart because I knew what they were going through to a degree. And I was like, there's got to be a better way. And so I started chasing this idea of what would life look like if you strove every day, if you showed up and would just strive for greatness, strive to be better in your work, your relationships, your faith, career, everything. If you just said, how can I be better today than yesterday? At the same time, I started CrossFit late 2010. And so this idea of every day competing against the clock, plus my natural tendencies to just be uber competitive were there. And I was like, what about compete every day? And I threw it out on a ski trip with some buddies, and they were like, bro, that is you. Like, to a T, that is your personality. And so I didn't know what to do with it. Spent about 8 months trying projects until my best friend was like, look at Life is Good. So they're out of Boston. They do 120 plus mil a year at the time. It's literally a stick figure guy, funny enough, named Jake. And he said, I think you should try t-shirts. Why not? Like, you have nothing to lose. So I put some money into boxes of shirts and tanks, started selling them out of the trunk of my car behind a CrossFit gym in Dallas in May of 2011, and was just like, let me figure this out. Like, I want to encourage and inspire the world to not settle. And so that was really kind of the basis of it. The business looks way different now, but the core message is still the same. How do we encourage, equip, and empower people to show up every day and be better than they were the day before? Because we know if you bet on yourself, if you go big, if you fail, it's always an easier burden to carry than the regret of what if, and letting fear talk us out of it. And so that's kind of what started it and got me down that whole path.
So, there's a lot packed in there that I want to kind of run with, but one of them that you talk about, and I wrote this down, is there's got to be a better way. And I think that happens for so many people. So many people over maybe the last couple of years have been, beating their head against the proverbial wall, wherever that's been, whether it's been full quarantine, in an office, out of an office. But I think the element that you bring that I appreciate is just because we're no longer competing in sports, maybe that the sun has gone down on that career in our life, doesn't mean that we shouldn't still compete. And competing has this, for some people, it has this kind of almost toxic nature to it. Like they connect a toxicness to competing, as opposed to, and I think you write a lot about this, you speak about this, it's like, no, it's not competing with others. I mean, that may drive a lot of people, but it's competing with yourself to be better. To be a better person today than you were yesterday, with the intention to be better tomorrow. It's something that I've adopted and appreciate, and other mentors have really impressed upon me. But that's what I really get is the message.
Yeah, you get stuck. A lot of us confuse competition with comparison, and we live in this comparison mindset. And there's someone always better than us, and there's someone always behind us. And so you can always feel good or you can always feel terrible, but those are things outside of your control. Competition, the actual definition is to strive to gain or win something. And when I look at it, it's always through the lens of how can I strive to gain my full potential and who I was created to be. And that's so important because I only control me. I control my attitude, my effort, my actions every single day. And a lot of people are like, well, that kind of sounds selfish and it sounds exhausting. And I look at it and I'm like, progress is never exhausting because you look at it and you're like, oh, I made progress. I got better. Like you look at the difference between the word productive and busy. Busy, you're a hamster on a wheel. At the end of a busy day, you're exhausted. And most times you're like, I don't even know if I got what I needed to get done. Productive day, you're exhausted, but you can look around and like, I got that done. I got that done. Like you have confidence builders. And so for me, this whole idea is actually selfless to compete every day against yourself because it takes effort. It takes energy. You're going to have days where you just don't want to put in the work, don't want to show up, but you do it because you understand, one, your life is worth competing for, but two, the better you become, the better you can show up for your family, for your team, for your coworkers. And so the easy way, the selfish way is to do nothing in terms of bettering yourself because it's easy to be complacent and comfortable. It's hard and it's work and it's effort to put in work to improve. But by doing so, you're doing it so you bring a better version of yourself to those you're trying to serve.
We live in a world, as you talk about, separating competition from comparison. And, comparison's in front of us. And as I've learned from some, thought leaders, is comparison is natural. I mean, it's actually a natural human response, but to me, it's how we choose to internalize that. And I know that's what you kind of go into a little bit. It's like, instead of thinking of winning and losing, thinking, how can I just be the best version of myself? That is a competition that has actually more benefit for others than it does a detriment. Because if I am the best version of myself, I'm going to bring out the best in others, right? If you view it that way, that's a healthy form of competition.
It's a healthy form of competition, and it also allows you to look at comparison in a healthy manner, to not say, where are they amazing that I suck? It's what do they do well and what can I learn from them? And when you're not worried about comparing yourself to them and you can look at them and learn from them, well, that's where real growth comes from, especially as leaders. We're looking for I look at other speakers and I'm like, what do they do well? How do they carry themselves on the stage? How do they set the tone or work the room? It's not, oh my God, they're so good and I'm terrible. Like it's always about how can I learn and then what works well for me? What can I take and apply? And I think you can only do that once you've gotten to the point of understanding like the only competition is the person I see in the mirror. Everybody else I'm trying to learn from.
Yeah, there's a maturity that comes about it. I know for me, as you stop and think about that, there's a maturity that I've, I guess, come to grips with and say, hey, if I'm the most comfortable version of myself for me, and I'm doing so in a way to help others, I found that other people are more comfortable there too. But if I if I let my insecurities show where I'm trying to, make sure that my knowledge, what I know is the value piece in front of me, I end up making everyone uncomfortable. And I think what I learned there, what I heard from you is, looking at those situations and say, hey, what does Jake do that's unique and different? And what can I do that's unique and different? Because that's how he relates, connects. Maybe that's an internal competition. How are you measuring progress? That's not just self-centered. That is actually, if you're doing that, you're actually doing that with the intention of serving others, right?
Yeah. You're living out of curiosity instead of allowing your ego to get in the way of everything. And that's really, Giannis Antetokounmpo. I'm going to totally butcher his name. The Greek freak.
It's all good. The Greek freak. Yeah, it's all
the Greek freak.
Giannis, hey, if you say that, there's not many people in the world, right? You say one Giannis, name, everyone knows.
So he did last year in the NBA Finals. He made one of the best defensive plays in NBA Finals history. Had a killer block, maybe game 3 or 4. And he got asked like a few days later by a reporter about it. And they're like, have you gone back and watched the block? It was so incredible. And he's like, no. He said, watching that just feeds my ego, and ego is all about what I've done. I am focused on pride, which is what I'm trying to accomplish and where I'm trying to go. And I love that because that's really what we look for when we're looking for acknowledgments and accolades is how do I boost my ego to make myself feel important or to let everybody else know how important I am versus how do I maintain curiosity to say, hey, listen, I may have done this stuff. I'm able to help you because I know some different things, but I'm always hungry to learn more because I believe there's improvement. And that's when you get to the top of the game in any industry. Like they've gotten there because they're always looking for a little edge or some way to grow and improve. They never feel like they're a finished product. They're always in the process of becoming.
Yeah, it's a learning mindset that if you have that growth learning mindset and you have that as part of your competition, like that, to me, I'm a competitive guy. And as I've talked to people and as I try to, share with my children, I'm competitive. Not because I want to be better than someone else, but because I view it as there's no other way to like carry yourself. Yep. It's my son this last weekend, the Washington Cup state playoffs, essentially tournament. And they ended up losing their first game, an 0-1 own goal header. It was just a tough loss to a team they've played a bunch of times. And then that led them the consolation bracket. And a few of the kids are like, it doesn't matter. And I just like, I don't get that. Like, I just don't physically. If you have the chance to step on the court, I don't care if you come to my backyard and we're going to play on the basketball court. I'm going to go hard because I don't know any different. To me, those are elements that it can be unhealthy if my expectations set other people. If there's a rub, to me, it's healthy because you know that I'm going to come and give 100%.
Well, and that's leadership. Can you be counted on to always do your best, regardless of the circumstances or how you feel? And I'm with you. Like consolation, man, that sucks. You want to play for the title, but if I'm stepping on the field, you're going to get everything I've got because I'm looking to win in that moment, and I want to be my best. And I think that carries over so much of life because you never want to waste a rep. You never want to waste an opportunity. You never want to give up that moment. Because it's, quote, not as important as maybe something else, especially from a leadership standpoint, because people are always watching us. Yeah. If we say we're a leader, if others knows we have aspirations of leadership or we have a specific title, people are always watching us. Yeah. And if we set the example that you can mail in effort when you don't feel like it or where it's not you want to be, we're setting a low standard for our culture and leadership. And so, yeah, 100% with you. And the best part is effort's always a choice. It is always our choice to show up and give our best. So I'm with you. And I hope the listeners understanding that can think about that and evaluate it because it's always up to you whether you give your best effort and can those around you know that you'll always be counted on, whether you love it or not, that you're going to give your best because that makes you a valuable, not only leader, but teammate.
Yeah. As I think about that, and as you say that last part is, how are you showing up to be the best teammate? And every one of us, it doesn't matter what your role and position is, you're a teammate. And some people have different roles and responsibilities. And one of the things I thought about trying to convey that to my son and his teammates is, don't go out and compete because it's about you. It's like, go give the guy beside you your best because that's what he deserves. And if you're like, well, this doesn't matter, it's like, well, maybe it doesn't matter to you, but that guy that's your teammate, he's playing his position, he deserves your best. And if you're acting at your best is going to help them be better, man, that's the competitive nature or attitude that I think we should have in life. And again, it's not getting back to this, I have to win. It's like, no, you beat me, great. But I want you to beat me when I've given 100% and not just because, oh, I mailed it in. Like, good for you. I let you win this time. There's something in my soul that it just doesn't sit right. But yet I've had to come to grips with it because it can be toxic at times.
Yeah.
There are times when I've been toxic in it.
No, and I think there is. And I think it comes back to a lot of times the intention. Is it to win or is it to show up and do your absolute best in that moment? And that goes back to the selflessness of competing against yourself is consolation game. It's easy to mail it in. It takes effort to lead, to stand up, to give your best, even if you might lose. in a game that maybe is not important as you wanted, but you're doing it for your teammates. That's why it matters. And that's the beauty of competition, because it pulls out more within us. I mean, you talk about it, we've talked about it, the Duke women's basketball coach, Carl Larson, she ran the quote that went viral, or the video, and she talked about, if you were out running sprints on the court, you would do just enough to get under the time limit. If you had 2 to 3 teammates, you're competing because you're going to all go fast. You're trying to see who's going to win. And that's where that beauty comes in. And that's where healthy cultures understand and say, hey, it's you versus you and me versus me, but we're going to push and elevate each other, just as in relationships. Iron sharpens iron. We want to be able to challenge each other in a healthy manner, versus a lot of cultures is it's you versus you and pit it out. And that's where you start to create the animosity, because teams especially, they have trouble because they don't want to share best secrets and what makes me successful and how I improve my day or how I time block, because, ooh, you may beat me for this award or that award, versus, hey, I'm going to tell you everything I do. I hope you get better because it's going to force me to raise my game. Yeah. And I heard Draymond Green talking about that on TV 2 days ago after playing the Nuggets. Jokic, MVP, he was like, oh yeah, Jokic won MVP last year. He may be MVP this year. He said, I love that because it forced me to raise my game, to play at another level that was beyond my comfort zone and made me better. And that's how we should always view anytime you have a chance to compete, is a chance to get out of your comfort zone and grow.
Well, I think you mentioned this in your book, again, Compete Every Day, and just fits in this context, is that competition is belonging. And it's when you choose to belong, that's when you compete. And you talk about it, it's like, what are you belonging to? And, it's when you belong to that team and you're running with those 2 or 3 other people, you're helping them grow. They're helping you grow. But that can also be from different teams. You mentioned, Draymond Green. I look back to the relationship of Michael Jordan and Craig Elo. And I have a friendship with Craig, and we've talked about this. And remember, Michael would not have been the same player if it wasn't for guys like Craig. Because Craig actually beat him on more times than Jordan did, except for the posterized, the mythical picture of, Jordan shooting over the top of him. But Craig's like, no, like, we beat them in season. And as we talked about that, as Jordan got better because he had to compete against those guys. You talk about the Last Dance. Jordan had to get better to compete against the Pistons. And I think when you look at it, that avenue of competition, the Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, you look at, even the contemporaries now in sports that are like, I don't like you as a competitor because you really challenge me, but I like you as a competitor because you really challenge me. And I think when you can elicit that on teams, it brings out the best in everyone.
Absolutely. And honestly, it's no different than, say, a coaching relationship with you and your clients. Like, you have to challenge them to get out of their comfort zone. And that's what a good coach does. They challenge them, they hold them accountable. And so in a sports sense, it's that. In a business sense, one of my clients, sales team. And so when we talk about like top performers each month, it's like, go learn from them, talk to them, figure out what they're doing, ask them questions. They're going to be an open book because they're like, listen, I know what I'm doing and I do it really well. If you want to do this and start doing it and start inching up, it's just going to force me to figure out, how do I keep raising my game? And so everybody's not looking at it as me versus you. It's like, here's how we win. Here's what I'm doing really well. And as you put more pressure on me, I'm going to embrace it and say, how do I keep climbing? Because I love kind of that thrill of back and forth versus getting our whole identity wrapped up in, did I win or did I lose? And there's outcomes, and outcomes matter in sports, and outcomes matter in life, but we don't influence, or we don't control the outcomes. We can only influence part of it by what we do. And that's that important part of competition, of what are you doing every day to improve?
So I want to ask you this, the companies, the leaders that you're working with today, what's the biggest competition that they seem to be sharing with you?
Yeah, it's interesting because it varies by client, because I'm in a few industries. One of my groups, it's complacency. And I say that from a standpoint of, they're growing so incredibly fast. And they're having unparalleled success in the last 2 years that they hadn't had in the previous 10. And so they're hitting a point where, you keep wanting to correct systems and keep wanting to stay on guys, but they keep growing. And so they're at that balance of, the team is winning, But we got a lot of mistakes we still need to correct, but it's really hard for guys to take the medicine when they're doing really well. And so you're getting people taking their foot off the gas. So we deal with a lot of complacency on that side. In some of my other areas, it's a similar sense of complacency, but it's more of this is the way we've always done it, or this is kind of what's comfortable and it's gotten me these results, and so I'm going to stay with it, versus looking for opportunities to grow and develop or embrace new software or new time management skills. And so that's where you're running to, because kind of the core three areas I see are complacency, inconsistency, and comparison. Comparison we can talk about. That's a lot more on the individual level. You see it at a company level if a CEO takes it and all they're looking at is what's everybody else in the marketplace doing versus like, what do we do really well and how do we improve it with the customer? The inconsistency and complacency tend to go hand in hand, because if you're complacent, you're going to have a really good month and a terrible month, and you're going to race again, and then you're going to slow down, or you just have very bad habits. And so that's kind of where we see those. And then kind of the third bucket is not really the biggest consistency or inconsistency or complacency. It's just developing their leaders, because they understand as they grow, they've been fortunate to have some incredible leaders, but they have a whole new class of people that need to grow and develop in the company. And there's no training or system to develop them into leaders. They're just, as they get better, we put them into manager roles, which you see everywhere. And that sets them up to fail as leaders, because most people aren't even trained to be managers, much less leaders. And so how do we make sure that we've put a leadership development program in place to build their next class so that when those opportunities come, they're able to step right in and start having a better impact or influence than they would otherwise?
There's something that just hit me on that last thought. You know, we see this a lot of times. You have that person that moves from star salesperson to now star sales leader, and yet they're also put into a competition. And, you know, I think about it as, you know, there's a much different competition on the sales floor as there should be for the sales leader, but yet oftentimes it's the same competition. And I believe this, you share this, is that, you know, the best competition for a leader is how can they help others accomplish more? It's not what they perform. It's that changing. And I think that's probably hard for a lot of leaders to understand. Oh, we have to have actually two different types of competitions depending on the person.
Yeah. And really you've got to have almost two different skill sets. So that scenario you just talked about, a lot of times sales guys, like they have a lot of influence over the outcome. They have a whole lot of control on the process. They don't control if the buyer is ready, but they can do everything around to set the buyer up for success. They thrive in that role. Well, as a manager, you're now responsible for the people. And so you have much less control over the outcome. You're now having to work more of the process with the people. And that can be a really frustrating piece, because you go from performer to what you have to be is a coach. And it's the same difference that you see with athletes all the time. Great athletes that become coaches really struggle to coach, because if they're naturally talented, they're going to think, well, just do this. And a lot of guys can't perform the way that they just naturally do. And so you tend to see guys that were backups, that were not the most athletically talented guys, become great coaches because they had to learn the process, they had to learn it, and then they had to learn how to teach it to others. Yeah. And so it's the same on the sales side. Just because we have a top performer doesn't mean they're ready to manage and lead. There's characteristics and traits, but it's flipping that switch and saying, okay, my competition now is how do I help these guys work the process, knowing that the process will yield the results, versus saying, how many times am I picking up the phone and calling myself, because not a lot of it's in your control anymore.
Yeah. Well, and I think those are lessons that the sooner you learn, the better off you are. It's if you learn the process yields a result, even if you're, you know, competing on that sales floor and thinking, well, I just need to win the next contest, as opposed to it doesn't matter what contest I win. If I build the right process, if I follow the process, if it's aligned properly, the results will come in time.
Yep.
And having that nature of that, you know, to a competitive context of I want to get better. So that is the competition.
Yeah. And really understanding from that standpoint, what are we doing? What are the things in our control that we can improve every day? How we coach people, what our habits are, how we're managing our time. Because a lot of those distractions that come up are things outside of our control. And they keep us from being at our best and competing every day, because we're focused on what we can't control and what we don't have and what excuses we love to make, versus like, how am I locked in? What am I using with what I have? And what am I doing with what I can today?
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, kind of how Compete Every Day kind of launched and, this personal transformation. All of us have areas where, as much as we want to compete, there's a struggle to compete. I'd love for you if you would, share. It's like, hey, where's an area you're like, man, this is a battle that I have to take every day to make sure that I'm reading my own words, competing every day.
Yeah, a lot of it is, I would say my biggest one with ADHD is just the focus side of being very intentional with where I am, blocking out distractions, because I could easily say, well, I'm managing a couple of businesses and I've got all this stuff going on, and then I'm not present in my relationship with my wife, or I'm focused on the wrong things and I'm not attentive with my team. And so that's where I have to be very intentional every day. And I do that planning the night before where I can, following my agenda as best I can. And I get like the idea of like, I don't want to be competitive in this space. And relationships is one where I hear most often, well, I don't want to be competitive in my relationship. And I ask, I'm like, if you think about a great relationship, a love relationship, marital, it started by dating. What were you doing in dating? You were striving to gain or win their heart. You were actively dating them. What happens to a lot of marriages? We stop dating each other and they fall apart. So what are you doing let's just reframe it. If it's not, hey, I need to beat somebody, it's how am I going to be better today? Well, maybe when I get home from work, I'm going to take my phone, I'm going to put it in the drawer for the first hour. So I'm locked in with my kids and my spouse, or I'm going to plan a date night for just us to go get away. Like you've got to get back in that mindset of like, I'm striving to gain and capture their heart. Because that's really that idea of win something. You're trying to win over their heart. And so that's one where I hear the most context and push back on this idea of competing, but it all goes back to just being 1% better. And 1% is such a small number that on its own doesn't do anything for us. Over time, it does an incredibly large amount for us, but we have to consistently stack it.
Yeah. What part of helping people kind of embrace the idea of competition gets you excited?
Ooh. I think for me, the thing that fires me up is when I see people that were stubborn or maybe struggled with more of a fixed mindset and struggled to see that idea of incremental growth paying off. Because I think so much of society is obsessed with the outcome. And we get so caught up in the outcome and the Amazon Prime quick deliveries on success that we fail to work the process. And so when I see someone and I can work with someone and they start to just kind of work the process little by little by little, and then you start to see the fruits of that. It's like they've been planting seeds in the field, working the field, waiting on rain. Rain comes and something finally starts to grow. That's fun. And like one of the ones I always laugh about is there was a guy right before COVID hit. So this feels like it's 2 decades ago. It's just 2 years. But he was at one of my events at the Michigan Realtors Association. And I have a scorecard in my book that's kind of a basic habit builder. And he was in my workshop and we started talking about it. And he kind of was peppering questions and seemed super defensive about it. And then afterwards he was like, hey, I got one more question. I cleared it up. And like 3 months later, I get an email from him. And he's like, oh my gosh, I'm reading 15 minutes every day. You wouldn't believe how many books I've gotten through. I've been sharing this scorecard with everybody. And I laugh because I'm like, you were the guy in the audience who I didn't expect to do anything with this. And he was like, well, I just didn't think like 10 to 15 minutes every day just wasn't enough to do enough. And he was like, but I wasn't factoring in 10 to 15 minutes every single day, what I could start doing until I started doing it. And I just kind of laughed. I was like, that's what fires me up. It's like, just focus on the little can't see. Stack them over time. Say, how do I just get a little bit better at this? Because more than anything, I just don't want to see people settle. I don't want them to go through the regret. And the thing is that we all know that when you get to the end and you have no time left to change, you're carrying and you're burdened by, versus saying, screw it, let's give this a shot. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but I'm going to get better in the process, just like competing against a tougher competition or opponent. You may not win, but you're going to get better. You're going to raise your baseline. And so the next time you play, you're going to be better.
And I think that's the part that I try to always keep in mind is, whether it's myself being an example to others, whether it's winning or losing, it doesn't matter. It's, am I moving forward in a way that's going to force me to get better? And if it's about me getting better, especially then when that better can help serve other people, then it's always going to work. It's always going to, be beneficial. And I really just think about it. It's like, the people that don't want to compete, or maybe someone's listening and it's like, competition isn't real big to me. I just don't care. It's like, I understand that statement. But what it's coming back to Carol Dweck and fixed versus growth. And it's, if I'm believing that this is the best I'm ever going to get, then that statement, that idea sets like, okay, I'm cool with that. But I believe that our opportunity is to be an example to others and ourselves to say, I can continue to grow and learn. And what version of me comes next is always going to be better. And so therefore, I'm going to work towards that, even if it's just 5 minutes a day, even if it's just, setting up my morning routine where I read my devotions. I read, the 3 or 4 daily books that I read to stretch my mind. That's going to make me better. There's going to be something of that today that's going to impact someone around me.
Yeah, I think every leader should just have that mentality you just shared of my best is yet to come. Like if you operate out of that, then you're constantly learning, growing, looking for opportunities to improve, whether you're 25 or you're 55. And that's where I think you have to be as a leader, because 1, you have to teach others that growth mindset, but 2, you have to wake up every day and say, if my best is truly ahead, then I'm excited about who I continue to become versus depressed or upset that my best is in the rearview mirror. And then I'm not doing more or leading more effectively because I don't think I can get to that next level.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you for encouraging me to compete a little bit more every day and be the example for those around me. So keep doing what you're doing. I appreciate it, man. It's great to chat with you.
You too, man. I appreciate the opportunity and continually honored by your company and leadership and getting to follow and learn from you online. So thank you for having me today.
I appreciate it, man. Till I see you next time, hopefully soon.
Yes, let's do it.
As you finished up listening to the conversation Jake and I had as I wrap this thing up, there's one of the things that Jake said that I really appreciate. And he, from Donald Miller's book, and he says, what story do you want to write? If you've listened to the podcast, you've heard some of those things, whether it's from the Vision Driven Leader, Hero on a Mission, books that we've related to, other guests that have spoken. And that's something that I want to just ask again to you. What story do you want to write? Choose to compete with yourself every day to get better. I've shared this. Hopefully I'll share it again with you. I'll share it another time. My personal mantra, my personal mission every day is to be better than I was yesterday, working toward with intention to be better tomorrow. That today's ceiling is tomorrow's floor. Yesterday's ceiling is today's floor. Now, some days I make a lot of progress. Some days I make just a little bit of progress. Some days I make progress in some areas, not so much others. But that's kind of like a lot of games. You can watch sporting events. We talked in this episode about my son in soccer, and he's at that age where he's trying to learn that stuff. My other son, who is a basketball player, is learning that. My daughter in her dance and soccer and in life are learning those things. I'm learning those things. Is how do I keep moving forward in spite of situations that maybe force me to look backwards? And I think Jake shared it is like, there's got to be a better way. There's a point in time where you're looking around and you're saying, there's got to be a better way. That's healthy. That's a good thing. That's not a comparative to say, oh, woe is me. They're doing better than me. It's how can I be better? And the greatest organizations, the organizations that make the most impact, in my belief, are curious enough to say, there's got to be a better way. I know for one of the greatest choices that I ever made, my wife and I made when we joined a network marketing company, we started that business, and that's what's led to a tremendous amount of impact. My thought was, there's got to be a better way. I was at a career crossroads. I was at a point where I was frustrated. I was dejected. I needed to grow as a person. Well, making a career change, making a change into a different environment led that on. Maybe you're listening in and you're thinking about, man, I need to be in a different environment. I'd love to help you through that. I'd love to help you navigate through that. Send me a message, Tyler@TylerDickerhoff.com. Would love to walk through that, or send me a message on any one of the social media channels, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever works for you. And I'd love to help you through that. Just as a part of the process, being a part of the community. Thank you for listening in. I'd love to know what you think of these episodes. Give me a rating or review. If you listened in, there was one point that really stuck out to you, man, I'd love for you to share that with me. Thanks again for listening. And until next time, have a good one.